The text wasn't meant for me. She'd left her phone on the kitchen counter, face up, unlocked, while she ran back upstairs to grab her work badge. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just standing there, pouring coffee into my thermos, half awake, listening to the morning news drone in the background. Her phone lit up. I glanced at it the way you glance at anything that suddenly glows 3 feet from your hand. One notification, a name I recognized, Ryan Mercer. Her project lead at Whitfield and Associates. The preview was visible without unlocking it. Hope your clueless husband doesn't get suspicious. See you tonight. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I set my thermos down very carefully because I didn't trust my hands. By the time Elena came back downstairs, I was leaning against the counter with my coffee, looking at the morning news like nothing in the world had changed. She grabbed her phone, didn't check it, didn't hesitate, kissed me on the cheek, and told me not to forget we had dinner at her parents' on Saturday. I said, wouldn't miss it. She left. I stood in my own kitchen in Raleigh, North Carolina, with 44 years of life behind me and a very specific kind of quiet ringing in my ears, the kind that doesn't come from silence, the kind that comes from finding out in the space of a single sentence that someone has decided you're the fool in your own story. I'm Marcus Bennett. I'm a certified public accountant. I've been doing taxes, audits, and financial reviews for 17 years. I run a mid-sized firm on Glenwood Avenue. 12 employees, solid clients, reputation that took a decade to build. I am, professionally speaking, a man who finds the thing people are trying to hide in the numbers. I do it every single day. My wife had been hiding something for months, and I hadn't found it. That was the part that stayed with me after she walked out the door. Not the rage, not the grief. Those came later. First came the question that every person in my position eventually has to sit with. How long had I been the clueless husband? And then the second question, which matters far more, what was I going to do about it? Before you hear what happened next, if the story is already pulling you in, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Tell me if you've ever had a moment where you saw something you couldn't unsee. Like the video so more people find stories like this one. Now let's keep going. Elena and I met when we were both 29. She was working as a marketing coordinator for a commercial real estate firm downtown. And I was 3 years into my own practice, still running out of a 2-room office on Hillsborough Street with a single part-time assistant and more ambition than furniture. A mutual friend introduced us at a fundraiser for the Umstead Park Trail expansion. One of those events where everyone is trying to look casually philanthropic while eating catered food they didn't pay for. She was sharp. That was the first thing I noticed. Not her looks, though she was beautiful, dark hair, dark eyes, the kind of direct eye contact that most people can't hold. What I noticed was that she was the only person at that event who was actually listening to the speaker instead of quietly talking over him. I ended up standing next to her at the back of the room. And when the applause came, she leaned toward me and said, "That man just described a $4 million erosion problem as a trail enhancement opportunity. That's impressive spin." I laughed out loud. We talked for 2 hours, exchanged numbers, had dinner 4 days later at a small Italian place on Glenwood. Not fancy, just good. And by the time the check came, I already knew this was someone I wanted to know for a long time. We got married 3 years later at the Fearington Village just south of Chapel Hill. 40 people, late October, warm enough to have the ceremony outside. My mother cried through most of it. Elena's mother organized the seating chart with military precision and took personal credit for the weather. For 12 years, we built a life. Elena climbed from coordinator to senior account manager to, 3 years ago, a director of client strategy position at Whitfield and Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm headquartered in the warehouse district. The job came with a significant salary bump, a team of 6 people reporting to her, and a new colleague named Ryan Mercer, who apparently had trouble keeping professional and personal in separate categories. I had no reason to suspect anything for a long time. Elena worked long hours, but she always had. She was ambitious and good at her job. When she started coming home later, I assumed the directorship was more demanding than she'd expected. When she began taking weekend calls, I didn't question it. When she started going to the gym on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, I was glad she was finding time for herself. I am, apparently, a man who is very good at finding what's hidden in numbers and very bad at finding what's hidden in behavior. Because looking back now, 3 months after that kitchen counter moment, the signs were there. I just wasn't reading them. The text from Ryan Mercer said, "Clueless husband," like it was an established fact between them, a joke they'd already made, which meant it wasn't the first time she'd described me that way, which meant there was a version of me that existed in their private conversations, some shorthand for the oblivious man she came home to every night. That's what I kept turning over in my head the first morning. By the afternoon, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her yet. I know how that sounds. I know the instinct is to walk into whatever room she's in and demand an explanation. I understand it completely. But I am a man who has spent his entire professional life watching people underestimate the power of documentation. I've seen divorces where the innocent party said everything too early, destroyed their own leverage, and watched the other side spend 6 months reframing the narrative. I've seen it cost people their homes, their savings, their reputation. If Elena was having an affair with Ryan Mercer, I needed to know the scope of it. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I showed a single card. So instead of confronting her, I did what I do professionally. I started gathering information. That evening, she came home at 7:30, which was earlier than usual. She was in a good mood, animated, telling me about a client presentation that had gone well. She made pasta. We ate together at the kitchen table and she asked about my day. And I told her about a quarterly audit I was wrapping up for a manufacturing company in Durham. I watched her the whole time, not suspiciously, just carefully, the way you look at something you're seeing for the first time, even though you've been looking at it for years. There was nothing to see. She was warm, present, funny. She touched my hand twice during dinner. We watched television afterward, and she fell asleep against my shoulder on the couch. Either she was one of the best actors I'd ever encountered, or she genuinely compartmentalized whatever was happening with Ryan Mercer so completely that it didn't register on her face when she was home with me. I thought about that for a long time after she went to bed. Over the next 3 weeks, I did 3 things. First, I spoke quietly to a family law attorney named Jennifer Walsh, whose firm is located off 6 Forks Road. Not to file anything, just to understand what I was dealing with legally, what documentation I'd need, what North Carolina law said about marital assets and grounds for divorce. Jennifer was direct and calm and told me exactly what to do and what not to do. One of the things she told me not to do was confront my wife during the information gathering phase. I was already not doing that. Second, I hired a private investigator, a former Raleigh police detective named Michael Foster, who'd been running his own firm for 11 years out of a small office near the Beltline. Michael was 55 years old, quietly methodical, and had the kind of energy that made you feel like nothing would surprise him. He confirmed the obvious within a week. Elena and Ryan Mercer were meeting regularly at a Marriott on Capitol Boulevard and occasionally at a restaurant bar in the Glenwood South neighborhood. He had photographs, he had dates, he had a pattern. The affair had been going on for approximately 7 months. Third, I started reviewing our finances with the same thoroughness I applied to client work. What I found, there was a different kind of discovery. Elena had a personal savings account that I knew about. Her own money, her own earnings, nothing joint. She'd always maintained it independently, which I'd never questioned. We were 2 professionals, both with income, both with our own financial identities that existed within a shared life. That's healthy. That's normal. What I found was that over the past 8 months, she'd been making regular transfers from that account, not to anything suspicious, not to Ryan Mercer, but to a separate account at a different institution that I had never seen before. The transfers were modest. $800 here, $1,200 there. Nothing large enough to trigger a question. Over 8 months, a little over $19,000. I sat with that number for 3 days before I understood what it meant. She wasn't building a secret fund for something frivolous. She was building a runway, a financial cushion that I didn't know existed, which meant she was planning to leave me and had been planning it for months. The affair wasn't a spontaneous thing that got out of hand. It was a decision she'd been living with long enough to start preparing her exit. The clueless husband text landed differently after that because she wasn't wrong, was she? For 7 months, she'd been constructing a second life while sitting across from me at this kitchen table, and I had filed quarterly returns, handled client audits, and come home every evening to a woman who was counting down to something I didn't know was coming. I thought about confronting her then. I thought about it every morning for a week. I didn't. What I did instead was plan. Michael Foster completed his documentation, photographs, timestamps, a clean chain of evidence that Jennifer Walsh confirmed was solid and usable. Jennifer began drafting the legal framework. I met with my firm's financial advisor, a woman named Laura Mitchell, who I've worked with for 8 years, and we began quietly restructuring certain assets that were entirely mine, premarital accounts, business equity. So they were clearly documented and ring-fenced. I didn't move anything that was joint. I didn't hide anything that was ours. I just made sure that what was mine was clearly, legally, demonstrably mine. And I waited. Elena had told me the previous month that her firm was throwing an end-of-quarter celebration on a Friday evening downtown, a rooftop event at one of the warehouse district venues. She'd mentioned it casually, the way she'd been mentioning most things related to her job. Quickly, without much detail, eyes moving away before they settled. I told her that sounded nice, asked if spouses were invited. She said it was more of a team thing, but she'd check. She didn't check. Or if she did, she told me the answer was no. On the evening of the event, I already knew from Michael's tracking that Ryan Mercer had booked a room at the same Capitol Boulevard Marriott. I did not follow her. I want to be clear about that. I did not go to the Marriott. I did not confront her there. That wasn't the moment I'd been building toward. The moment I'd been building toward happened on a Saturday morning, 5 days later, when Elena slept in while I got up at 6 and came downstairs. I spent 3 hours doing what I'd been planning to do for weeks. I called a moving company, a small local outfit out of Garner that Michael had recommended for discretion, and arranged for them to arrive at 9 o'clock. I had already, over the past 3 weeks, quietly moved my most personal possessions to my firm's storage space downtown. Documents, my father's watch collection, a few pieces of furniture from my family that had been in the house since we moved in. What remained and what I arranged to have moved that Saturday morning was Elena's. Not destroyed, not damaged, not touched vindicatively. Moved, carefully, professionally, efficiently. 3 months of planning had produced a very specific outcome. By 9:45 that morning, our shared bedroom had been converted to a guest room. Her clothing, her personal items, her vanity, everything that was hers, had been moved with extraordinary care to the second guest bedroom at the end of the hall. Her home office had been left exactly as it was. The kitchen was untouched. The only thing I'd left in the master bedroom beside the now clean and remade guest linens was a single folder on the bed. Inside the folder, the photographs Michael Foster had taken, a printout of the financial account she'd been quietly building for 8 months, a cover letter from Jennifer Walsh's office confirming that divorce proceedings had been initiated as of that morning, and a single handwritten note from me, for sentences. I found the text on a Tuesday morning in October. I spent 3 months making sure I understood what I was dealing with before I said anything. I hope you understand that I respected you enough not to do this in anger. Marcus. The moving team was gone by 10 o'clock. Elena came downstairs at 10:17. I was at the kitchen table with coffee and my laptop, working through a client file. I heard her footsteps cross the upper hallway. I heard them stop. Then I heard them move, quickly now, toward the master bedroom. The door opened, a long silence, then a sound I hadn't expected. Not screaming, not anger. A sound like air leaving a room. Her footsteps on the stairs were different coming down than they'd been going up. Slower, unsteady. She appeared in the kitchen doorway. I looked up. Her face had done something I'd never seen it do before in 12 years. It had collapsed inward, not into tears, though those were there, into something that looked like the specific shock of a person who has just realized that a plan they were executing with confidence has been intercepted, understood, and answered before they could deliver it. She sank to the floor in the kitchen doorway. I don't mean she sat down. I mean her knees gave out and she went down against the door frame and sat there on the tile with the folder in her hands and cried with the kind of intensity that is almost indistinguishable from physical pain. Marcus, my name, just my name, in a voice I didn't recognize. I closed my laptop. I know, I said. That was all. She asked me how long I'd known. I told her since the Tuesday in October when Ryan Mercer's text appeared on her unlocked phone on the kitchen counter. The expression on her face when I said October, when she understood that I'd known for 3 months and said nothing, had sat across from her at this table and asked about her day and watched television and come to bed and done all of it while knowing that expression was something I will carry for a long time. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was closer to disorientation, like a person who believed they understood the room they were standing in and has just been told the room has completely different dimensions. "You didn't say anything," she said. "No. Why?" I looked at her steadily because I needed to understand the full picture before I said a word. "That's how I work, Elena. You know that." She looked down at the folder in her hands, the account. "Yes." "How did you find it?" "The same way I find everything." I looked at the numbers. I paused. 8 months. Elena. You've been planning this for at least 8 months. That changes what this is. That's not a mistake someone made and couldn't figure out how to stop. That's a decision someone made and was executing while sitting across from their husband every evening. She didn't argue with that, which told me she'd already made her peace somewhere in the past 8 months with the accuracy of that characterization. "Who else knows?" she asked. "My attorney, the investigator I hired, Laura, regarding my business assets." I paused. "Your parents don't know yet. Neither does anyone else. What gets shared beyond that is up to you." She looked up. "You hired an investigator. I needed documentation. Of course you did." She said it without bitterness, almost with something like recognition. "You're the most methodical person I've ever known. And you told Ryan Mercer I was clueless." The silence after that was very complete. She tried in the weeks that followed to reframe things. I don't say that to condemn her. I think it's what people do when they're standing in the rubble of a choice they made and they need to find a story about it that they can survive. She said our marriage had felt distant for 2 years. She said I was always working. She said she felt like she was living next to someone instead of with someone. She said she tried to tell me things weren't right and I hadn't heard her. Some of what she said had truth in it. I knew that. I wasn't a perfect husband. I was often inside my own work in ways that weren't fair to her. There were years where I gave more of my attention to the firm than to the person I'd built my life alongside. I knew there were evenings where she sat across from me and I was physically present, but mentally 3 counties away, parsing some client's receivables problem while she talked about her day. And I made the appropriate sounds without really listening. I'm not proud of that. I've thought about it a great deal in the month since. I told her I heard that, and I told her it didn't change what she'd chosen to do about it. "You could have told me," I said. "You could have said, Marcus, this isn't working anymore. I'm not happy. I need something to change." I would have listened. I would have tried. You had 12 years to have that conversation with me. I let that settle. Instead, you built a private account, met another man in hotels on Capitol Boulevard, and described me to him as your clueless husband. Those aren't the choices of someone who tried everything else first. Those are the choices of someone who decided and then went ahead and decided some more. She didn't have an answer for that, which, again, told me everything. What stayed with me was the private account more than anything else, because the affair, as painful as it was, I could understand on a human level. People make terrible choices when they feel disconnected. When something in them reaches toward warmth from a direction they shouldn't. I don't forgive it, but I can trace the logic. The private account was different. The private account required sitting across from me night after night and making deliberate transfers to a place I couldn't see, building a cushion for a life she was preparing to step into, while I continued to go to work and come home and trust that the person sitting beside me was in the same marriage I was. That kind of sustained, calculated deception is a different thing entirely from a bad choice made in a weak moment. It's a commitment, and it told me that whatever had broken between us had been broken long enough for her to build something new on top of the wreckage without once asking me if I wanted to try to repair it. Ryan Mercer called me. I didn't expect that, but about 2 weeks after I filed for divorce, after Elena had moved in temporarily with her college roommate in North Hills while she figured out her next steps, my cell phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, a man's voice introduced itself. "Marcus, this is Ryan Mercer. I think we should talk." I was in my office. It was 11 in the morning. I leaned back in my chair. "All right," I said. "Talk." He was uncomfortable. I could hear it before he said a single substantive thing. He was the kind of man who was very comfortable when he's the one with leverage and not at all comfortable when the ledger has been rebalanced. He said he wanted me to know that he and Elena had been honest with each other. He said he hadn't set out to interfere in anyone's marriage. He said he hoped I didn't have any personal animosity toward him. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, I said, "Ryan, you sent my wife a text message calling me her clueless husband. You don't need to explain your feelings to me. I just encourage you to think more carefully in the future before you put things in writing." Another silence. The civil discovery process in North Carolina, I continued, is fairly thorough. If you're wondering whether your communications, texts, emails, call records might become part of the documentation in a contested divorce proceeding, the answer is they might. That's worth knowing. He ended the call shortly after that. I went back to my client file. The divorce took 8 months to finalize, not because it was contested in any explosive way. Elena didn't fight the financial picture, partly because the evidence of her own separate account gave her no strong ground to stand on, and partly because I believe some part of her understood that what she'd done was not a thing she could easily argue against. She'd been building an exit fund while lying to my face for most of a year. Her own lawyer apparently advised her that a judge was not going to be sympathetic to that narrative. We divided things cleanly. The house was sold. The equity split according to what each of us had contributed over 12 years, which Jennifer Walsh documented with precision. My business assets, entirely mine, entirely documented, stayed mine. Her savings account, the one I wasn't supposed to know about, became legally a point of negotiation. She kept it, but we both knew what it represented. On the day the paperwork was finalized, I sat in Jennifer Walsh's conference room on 6 Forks Road and signed the last pages with a pen that had my firm's logo on it. Jennifer shook my hand. I drove back to my office. My assistant, a woman named Karen who has worked with me for 9 years and knows my face better than most people, looked up when I walked in. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm all right," I said, and I meant it. Elena and Ryan Mercer did not stay together. I heard about this not from her directly, but through a colleague who overlaps with the Whitfield and Associates world. Apparently, the relationship did not survive being exposed to daylight. Things that live inside secret texts and hotel rooms on Capitol Boulevard don't always translate well to actual life. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't satisfied either. I just noted it the way you note weather, present then past. What I thought about more was the word she'd used, clueless. I've thought about that word more than I've thought about almost anything else from this entire experience, because she wasn't wrong about the word she was using. She was just wrong about what it referred to. I was clueless about the affair, yes. I missed the signs that, in retrospect, I can clearly identify. I was standing in my own kitchen reading a text message that had been sitting 3 feet from me on a counter, but I was not clueless about how to respond to it. I am not a man who acts from emotion when information will serve better. I spent 12 years building a firm on the principle that the numbers tell you everything if you give them time to speak. I applied the same discipline to the worst thing that happened in my personal life, and it worked exactly the way I built it to work. You find what's hidden. You understand the full scope before you move. Then you move precisely without anger, without anything that can be used against you. 3 months of patience. One Saturday morning, she came downstairs and fell to her knees in the kitchen doorway, and everything I'd quietly put in place was already done. I want to be honest about something because these stories are easy to tell in a way that makes one person the obvious villain and the other the complete innocent, and I don't think real life is usually that clean. I was a man who worked too much. I know that. There were years where Elena sat across from me at this table, and I was present in body and somewhere in an audit in my head, and I knew it and I didn't do enough about it. I'm not sure the marriage was failing because of that. I genuinely don't know what she was feeling in the months before Ryan Mercer appeared in her professional life, but I'm not going to stand here and tell you I was a perfect husband who was simply ambushed by an unfaithful wife. What I am going to tell you is that when you suspect something is wrong in your marriage, you owe it to yourself to understand it fully before you react. Not because the other person deserves that courtesy, they may not, but because you deserve to act from a position of knowledge rather than from a position of shock. Shock makes you say things that undermine you. Documentation makes you free. I didn't yell. I didn't make accusations I couldn't support. I didn't give Elena or Ryan Mercer a single moment where they could reframe what had happened and cast themselves as the victims of an emotional, unstable husband. I gathered what I needed. I protected what I'd built, and on a Saturday morning in Raleigh, North Carolina, I made it impossible for anyone to pretend I hadn't understood exactly what was happening in my own house. I'm back in the master bedroom now, mine again. The house sold 6 months ago, and I'm in a condo in the North Hills area, a smaller space, quieter, with a home office that is exactly the way I want it, and a kitchen I cook in more than I ever did when I was trying to keep a marriage from quietly burning down. My father used to say, "The accounts always balance eventually, Marcus. Your job is to make sure you're on the right side of the ledger when they do." He was an accountant too, retired now, lives out in Cary with my mother and their dog, and a garden he maintains with the same meticulous attention he once gave to his practice. I called him a few days after I found the text, before I'd done anything, before I'd spoken to anyone. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What's your instinct?" "To wait," I said. "To understand the full picture first." "Good," he said. "That's the right instinct, trust it." I did. The accounts balanced. They took 8 months to finalize, but they balanced. There's a woman I've been seeing for the past 2 months. Her name is Sophie. She works in hospital administration at WakeMed, and she has the kind of laugh that doesn't ask permission. We met at a dinner party at a colleague's home in Cameron Village, the kind of gathering I'd stopped going to after the divorce and started going to again when I remembered that isolation is only useful temporarily. I'm not going to tell you Sophie is the redemption arc of this story. I don't know yet what she is. I know she's honest, direct, and has no patience for anything that wastes her time or disrespects her intelligence. I know she asks real questions and waits for real answers. I know when she says something, she means it. That's enough to go on with. The last thing I want to say is this, that text message on the kitchen counter. "Hope your clueless husband doesn't get suspicious." It was meant to be the private language of 2 people sharing a secret at my expense. A joke between them about the man who didn't know. The man who was too absorbed in his spreadsheets and his quarterly reports to notice what was happening in his own life. Here's what I know about information. It doesn't care who finds it. It doesn't care whose side it helps. It just sits there in text messages and bank statements and GPS logs and photographs, waiting for someone to look at it directly instead of away from it. I looked at it, all of it, and when I was done looking, I knew exactly what to do. My name is Marcus Bennett. I'm a certified public accountant in Raleigh, North Carolina. I find what's hidden in the numbers. And it turns out that the most important audit I ever conducted wasn't for a client. It was for myself. And the accounts, when they finally balanced, showed something I hadn't expected. I was worth more than I'd believed when I was trying to hold together something that had already been decided without me. That's not a small thing to learn at 44. Some people spend their whole lives not learning it.